How's it going, everybody? So excited to be here with you today. We've just wrapped our 4th Creative Strategy Summit. I cannot believe it. Reza, what are we here to chat about today?
Oh man, it's wild. It's so interesting. I remember the first time we did the summit. Before the summit, we're like, is this creative strategist role a real thing? It seemed to be new. No one really knew what it was, but it felt to us like it was the perfect role that described the problem at the time. And what did we have? Maybe 1,000 people registered for the first Creative Strategy Summit. And then now there's this past one, I don't remember, 15,000 people register for it. And to see the journey of the creative strategist and how far it's come till today has been really exciting, but also insane to understand that this role is just at the beginning of its story. And especially with what's going on in AI, our view is that the creative strategist has 100x more growth ahead of it. And I'm just so excited to talk about the role and where we think it's going, and excited to be here with Alicia, that all of you should know and get a better understanding of who Alicia is, and you'll understand more about the role of the creative strategist through her story. So excited to dive in.
This is incredible. I remember those 1,000 attendee days, and to know that 18,000 people attend now, oh my gosh. And to know that every D2C brand has or is hiring a creative strategist, oh my gosh. But we have to start by paying homage. What I'm really curious about is how this role has evolved, and I think Alicia is a perfect representation of that. So Alicia, maybe you can kick off with a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so 3 years ago, I worked at a D2C company as a graphic designer, and one of my responsibilities was making ads, and I use motion to measure the performance of my ads. And for the first time in my career as a designer, I finally got this feedback loop where I could measure the results of my actions day to day, and I became really obsessed with this idea of creative strategy. So I met Evan in some of our monthly calls. I attended the Creative Strategy Summit, of course, and I got a PDF in my inbox one day called Becoming a Creative Strategist, which truly defined what I wanted to do when I grew up. I just became obsessed with becoming a creative strategist. So I just dove in head first and kind of elbowed my way in, and one thing led to another, and now I work at Motion, which is insane.
I think the coolest thing about Alicia's story is just senior graphic designer. And I was like, what the heck's next? I'm not seeing the value I can really create. Not sure what's next. And then this role popped up called the creative strategist, where it's a perfect marriage between the data side and the creative side. And seeing Alicia embody that, absolutely incredible. Reza, something I am curious about is a lot of people can see themselves in creating a career similar to Alicia. What I'm curious about is, on your end, how do you see this role evolving?
The interesting thing about the creative strategist role, for anybody who's been like Alicia, a person who can tap into a different discipline that's related to the discipline that they started in, and realize hey, actually I could be pretty good at both of these things together. That's kind of what made the creative strategist really special. It was at that point in the early days, you had the data and the growth team over here and the creative team on the other side, and someone needed to bring those two worlds together so that they can operate efficiently and actually create more winning ads. And the person to do that really needed to speak both languages. They needed to have left brain, right brain in sync so that they could basically be this hybrid human that in some ways I feel everybody aspires to be this polymath type of individual that could be the idea of an engineer who can design, or a designer who can write code in the software world. I think it's similar in marketing. If you're a data person who understands creative, or vice versa, that's a really powerful individual. And at first, I think as an industry, what we thought was that this is a role that is kind of neither, but helps those two worlds talk to each other better. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is that the individual who is in between those two roles, basically they became forged into this new, really powerful, high leverage individual that has a lot of capability to not just facilitate work between these two roles, but also do a lot of the work themselves. Why we are very excited about the creative strategist is that for the last 4 years, the creative strategist has basically been mastering the art of bringing multiple disciplines together. And so they're really well positioned now that the whole industry needs to understand, okay, AI is the new thing and we need to figure out how it fits into our workflow. The creative strategist, who began as the person who was the bridge between data and creative, now this is the individual who's the bridge between data, creative, and AI. And from what I've seen, the creative strategists like Alicia, who are really good at being an excellent creative strategist, are just naturally moving into this role, because to get really good at AI, you need to be able to communicate to other people around a vision and an idea that you want to bring to life, which comes really naturally to the creative strategist anyways. And so our bold claim is that like the creative strategist is going to be 100 or 1,000x more important from here. And the reason is that everybody knows that AI is going to change everything, obviously. And who is the person in the growth marketing roles that's going to drive a lot of this impact? Our view is that it's the creative strategist. So you can think about the future of this role is almost perfectly in sync with the future of AI. And as in the creative world, creative production is becoming more and more commoditized. It's not there yet that with a click of a button, all of your ads get produced, but it's becoming more and more commoditized every day. We see that. And on the distribution side, the algorithms basically figure out who to put your ad in front of. So if the distribution is becoming commoditized and the creation is becoming commoditized, the role in the middle who helps both of those things is the one that rises to the highest leverage point, and that's already the creative strategist. So it's just such an exciting time for anybody who is a creative strategist or is an aspiring one. And whether you come from a creative background and want to develop more of the data side, or you come from a growth background and want to develop the creative side, we've seen both of those. And so, yeah, just a really exciting time to be in this role.
There's a quick follow-up on that one. So now a lot of people jumping into creative strategy, they're wondering, where do they fit in this org? Like talking about bringing this all together. What does the org of tomorrow look like around this?
It's such an interesting question because none of us actually know the impact of AI on organizational structure. But I think what we know for sure is that the roles that have the highest leverage point will remain and just become more and more and more and more important. To describe the role of what a creative strategist does, that's the part that regardless of what the organization looks like, you could be a founder running your e-commerce business with like 2 other people, or you could be, 50-person D2C brand or larger. Somewhere in the org, this function needs to be taken really seriously and done very well. We used to joke about the hat of the creative strategist. That was on the PDF that Alicia talked about. Like it literally had a picture of a hat on it. Because our whole view is that like ideally, if you're a larger org, you should definitely hire a creative strategist. And our view is that should be, for all the creative strategists, the highest paid role on the team. We can talk about that. But even if you're a founder and you're running an e-commerce brand, to understand how you can wear the hat of the creative strategist and basically take that job really seriously is the thing that matters the most. The creative strategist's job is to direct what happens next. There was a time where people were like, oh my God, AI is going to just eat all of us and we have nothing left to do. I think slowly everyone's getting to the point of this is a very powerful technology, but it's still there to fulfill the commands of the human who can command it well. The thing that the creative strategist does a really good job is like having a vision and directing people towards it. So I think there's a lot of questions on what happens to orgs, but I think if your aspiration is always like, how do I have a bigger impact? How do I leave a role that's just basically like grunt work and execution? And how do I level up to do more high impact work? AI is going to accelerate that. And so everyone should figure out, how do I go to one level higher of impact? And I think the creative strategist role is a perfect place to embody that. So regardless of what the organization looks like, our view is that the creative strategist is not going anywhere.
Time to cook. Okay, this is what gets really interesting. You've mentioned AI a ton. And when we talk about AI, there's talk about the now and the future, which you alluded to. But Alicia, I want to talk about the now a little bit more. So something that's really curious, that I am curious about, is like AI can actually generate a lot of fear in people, especially with the idea of like, we are coming to take your career over, and something like that could be happening. So what I'm curious about in your experience is if you can speak to the graphic designers out there or the individual contributors out there who might be afraid of AI in this case. And then I'm also curious to get your opinion on like how creative strategy can almost offer like a safe haven in this experience.
Well, I think for me, creative strategy was just something to lean into that finally just unlocked some kind of motivation inside of me that I didn't have before. So I think my thought is, if you're someone, whether you're on the creative side or you're on the media buying side, if you feel that same ambition and motivation around this concept of creative strategy, leaning into it and embracing the fact that AI can help you achieve success in this role. Like Reza said, it's not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, I feel like other roles are going other places and getting absorbed by this one. So I think if you feel any drive at all towards this type of role, I think you should just lean into it and embrace it and enjoy the journey.
I love that. I love that. Look fear in the face and say, like, how am I going to start to evolve in this new world? That's such the right mindset to have. And I think inspiring for the people that are out there. Reza, the piece that I'm curious about on your end here is like talked a lot about what this could look like. But when it comes to the actual role of creative strategy, how do you think AI is going to impact it the most?
We use the words like prompting AI, which is an interesting like phrase to use. Even pre-AI, we're always prompting each other to do stuff, right? Like if a creative strategist, let's say AI doesn't exist, what are they doing? They're basically prompting all day long a creator or a designer or other people on the team. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I think we should do. Or going back and forth and like facilitating a brainstorm around figuring out what to do. The role of the creative strategist in some sense has always been about producing a brief. And to get to producing a brief, you're basically going through a lot of analysis, you're going through a lot of research, you're doing ideation. The role of AI is basically just there to accelerate all of that. Like I remember we created the diagram of the creative strategy flywheel. This was, I think, before the first creative strategist summit. We're like, what are all the moving pieces here? Like, what's the job of the creative strategist? And in some ways, you can make an argument that it starts in different places. Our view has always been that the creative strategist should be a role that drives revenue for a business. It's why we think that it should be the highest paying job. It's the same way that like if you're in a sales role in that career, you can make a lot of money because you're driving revenue for the business. Our view is that the creative strategist is a 100% revenue generating business, like directly impacting revenue. Because that's true, our view has always been that that role should be very rooted in analytics and data. And like this is not a role of just pure intuition and pure guesswork, because as you ship more ads, there's a lot of information around what's worked, what's not worked. How are we using that to come up with new iterations? A really strong grounding on performance data and analytics is really important. Alicia, you were talking before we started around how that used to be intimidating for creative strategists. Might be helpful just to stay on the analytics just for a second. And Alicia, talk a little bit about like how intimidating it used to be as a creative strategist to be like, oh my God, I have to wrap my head around data. And that now like there's like tools that make that a lot easier, and creative strategists can be more well-grounded in data so that they can do the rest of the work a lot more effectively.
Yeah. Well, I think, of course, motion helps so much with that intimidation, because previously my option was to look literally at Facebook Ads Manager, which was essentially just a spreadsheet that was difficult to navigate. As someone with a creative brain, made things colorful, put them in charts, and put all of my ads that I made that I feel so personally invested in, paired that with the numbers that showed me what was actually moving the needle. And that's what made it so much less intimidating and more accessible, and really helped me do my job better.
Yeah, so it's like the analytics is a starting point, and then that way the creative strategist is well grounded on what's been working and what's not. And then the rest of their work is like research around competitors, around what's going on in organic, just like general trends. There's a lot of the role is to just have a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world. What are other people doing? The cheap version of creative strategies go like rip off a competitor and see what they're doing. And like, you know, there's a place for that. And I think even the best creative strategists who like don't like to say it, I think everyone's doing a little bit of like getting inspired by other competitors, but that's just a small part of the research process. You know, and then it's taking all of that, synthesizing those learnings from the analytics side, from the research side, to start grounding some intuition around, okay, what are we going to try next? What direction are we going to go? And then ultimately just communicating that as a brief that today goes through a human. But, you know, our view is that eventually that brief still stays the same. You still need to be able to articulate, here's what we learned, here's what we're thinking, here's what we want to do. And it's very possible that that brief is just a prompt that goes to an AI system. And I think we're not there yet, but it's very obvious for everyone to understand that we are going there, which is why it's very believable that the creative strategist is going to be the role that has the highest impact, because now they're communicating to a team. Tomorrow they're communicating to AI. And so the person who can communicate and direct the best is the one who's going to have a really big impact on the team.
Alicia had mentioned something that I want to get your take on, Reza, that the creative strategist might be able to expand their scope of work, not just stay in a limited scope. What I'm curious about is like, what does that expanded scope look like, and how does an AI enable that?
In any industry, in any company, and any department, we're going to see a collapse of of talent. It used to be that you need 3 people to do something, and now like 1 person can do it. Where you'll see it the most is that you have a company who's maybe like 10 people, and like, I don't know if I can hire a data analyst and a media buyer and a creative strategist and an influencer marketing manager and a social media manager. Like, if most companies are of that size, and they have a huge challenge in hiring more people to do more specialized roles. So I think we'll start to see that first play out. Like, you can have a founder who's like lead creative strategist at the company, which I actually think if you're a D2C brand, like that probably should be the role of the founder, is to be the primary creative strategist of the company. And so who knows, maybe it's just like the founder being creative strategist and growth marketer and data person. And I think it's hard to say how far the collapse of the roles are going to be and what they become called and so on. But I think it's just AI is so effective at making individuals be able to do a lot more with less, that the creative strategists, who are often after, like, and we'll talk about naming conventions soon, I think is a very exciting topic, but you might be limited by some other role in being like, I want to test this or that, and like you don't know how to apply those naming conventions in your ad, and you're blocked by the media buyer in order to do that. I think we'll start to see a lot of those things just become more and more efficient for the creative strategist to do on their own without being blocked by anybody else.
Huge. This makes me think of something. So some of us on the motion team were hanging out with Alex Cooper and Hannah Haug the other night, and they were talking about how freaking hard it is to hire a creative strategist. Shout out to Hannah and Alex, by the way. They are the best. So in this process, Alicia, something that I am curious about is like, when people are trying to navigate their careers, what types of folks should be getting into this field?
Well, I think Reza touched on something, which is like that you're essentially prompting all day. Like you're really doing the work all day. And what that means to me, and what I think is so important, is that just because AI exists doesn't mean that you need to not know how to do this job. In fact, I think you need to become so passionate and so invested in your work, in all of these different facets of your work, that is what enables you to use AI to its full potential, is having true understanding and expertise in everything that this role involves. And that includes everything from paid and organic social to copywriting to consumer psychology to media buying best practices. So for me, it's all about just investing in all of those areas and really diving deep in each one of them so that you can truly raise the bar of your work and become this incredible, valuable person on the team that we all know that creative strategists can be.
Yeah, because one thing I think we should emphasize, a lot of people talk about AI and they say, oh my God, it's going to make everything easier. You don't need to learn this and that. And like, that is actually not what we're saying at all. It's like, what we're saying is that the creative strategist job is not easy, and it's getting more difficult because first they had to master creative and then they had to master data. And to Alicia's point, they still have to master and continue to master those 2 things. And now they also need to master AI. This is an extremely ambitious, extremely high performing role. That's not like, if you remember in the early days of like e-commerce, there's these courses around like, how can you be a drop shipper? It's so easy. You click a button. We're not saying creative strategist in a box, click 2 AI buttons and you're going to be great. The thing that will make someone really great is to understand those disciplines really well, so that when they are talking and communicating to AI about those things, they can do it at an elite level and get the most out of the AI system. So there's no shortcut here about how to become great at it. And I think that's why Motion's commitment has always been around, this role is hard and it needs really good content. And we realized that very early on. Our content team is now like 8 or 9 people, and we're producing so much stuff around what it takes to be a good creative strategist. And as we were talking about, like, in order to arm the creative strategist for 2026 and introduce AI into this mix, like, there's a lot more to learn here. So I think we need to balance the audience a little bit by saying there's tools that are going to make things a lot easier, but there's like real skills to master in order to be able to make the most out of it.
Okay, I have a couple follow-ups in there. There are such good things. Alicia, I'm going to start with you. So I think all of us have had conversations with so many different people in so many roles. So let's think: graphic designers, video editors, media buyers, creative team members, content team members, copywriters. You can see how far I can go with this. I guess what I'm curious about is, like, based on your own experience, is there any one of those roles that seems most well suited for grabbing this role of creative strategist?
I think it's interesting because a lot of the people that I've met in this role typically come from a media buying background. And I've always felt a little bit unique in the sense that I came from a design background, which was less common. But I actually think in a lot of ways it gives you an advantage because creative is truly like at the crux of this role. And we're seeing it more and more that creative is the new targeting. Creative is everything. So if you understand creative deeply, I think you're actually at a greater advantage. So I would encourage anyone who's on the creative side and feels intimidated about data, but also feels motivated and ambitious to learn it, that this is the best opportunity for you to like really lean into that. And I think you actually do have an incredible advantage.
I actually have a theory of why it's the media buyers that have gravitated to the role. It was always inherently a revenue-driven role, and they were thinking about where is the biggest growth unlock. And then at some point, they're all like, "Oh my God, it's here! Like it's where the creative is." And because their purpose was to unlock growth and unlock revenue, even if they weren't necessarily creative to begin with, they understood that like this is the unlock, and so we need to go figure out how to do this thing. And so often it was like we have to go talk to our creative team. But there's a big gap, and like it's the whole story of how the data and creative needed to come together. But the media buyers and the growth people understood that naturally because they are revenue thinking individuals, whereas creative people, and I think we need to create a lot more content and like help people from our creative backgrounds not be intimidated by revenue and numbers and performance, and actually think of it in like a gamified way, which wasn't possible before. If you're a creative person, someone came to you and just like, "Hey, make me these 3 things." And you're like, "Why? Like, how is the last things that I did? How have they been doing?" When you start to see the performance of an ad that you made, it's just very natural. Like it's like playing a game almost. Like I made these things and this one is crushing. And in some ways, the metrics can be very intimidating because there's all these KPIs and these like jargon terms. But in some ways, it's just spend. Can you create an ad that will fly and generate a lot of spend because the algorithm likes it and it gets picked up? And if you're a creative person, that's a very easy feedback loop to follow. It's like, I make stuff, some of them fly. How do I do more of that? And it's very exciting. And it also is a huge career unlock because, it's like career tip 101. If you want to make more money, stay closer to the money. And creative strategists can do that by understanding that we're not just creating assets, we're moving revenue for the business. To Alicia's point, the creative people are actually really well suited to be the best creative strategists if they can just start to lean into revenue a little bit more and just kind of think about revenue as the keeping score of which one of your ads is doing well. That's revenue for the business. And so I think it can be a skill to learn and would make creative people really effective at the role.
And you make a good point too about like data is intimidating, but it also is very rewarding. It's like a dopamine hit. Every single time I see an ad that works, finally, I feel some kind of feedback loop. And I think designers, videographers, social media managers especially have a really hard time justifying the value of their role because they don't have that like core component to their role. They can't actually prove revenue. So having that association with your work is actually like really, really motivating and fulfilling. And also, of course, huge leverage in your career as well.
Yeah, the one piece that I am sometimes a little doom and gloom about when it comes to AI, and I think it's important, like we should talk about, there's like immense opportunity when it comes to AI, but there are danger zones too. Like the types of jobs that someone can issue an instruction to you and then you need to fulfill that instruction is very dangerous. I think those are the roles that AI will very quickly take over. But I think it ties very nicely with human ambition anyways. Like who wants to be in a job where all they're doing is someone gives them instructions and they do it? And I think sometimes if you're in like the content creator side or on the design side, because of how challenging it's been to produce that work historically, you could kind of make a good living by being someone that's like, okay, what do you need? Let me look at it. Let me produce it, and kind of just go into a rhythm of doing that. But I think if you're in a creative role that kind of looks like that, that is a bit of a danger zone to be concerned about. But you step a little bit over into this side on the piece of that work that impacts revenue, and it's like a world of a difference. Exciting on this side, a little bit concerning on this side. So like Motion wants to help you kind of lean into the excitement and help figure out how you can drive impact and revenue for the companies you work with, and obviously career acceleration for yourselves.
Like you said, if you're in a role where somebody can tell you what to do and you can do it, I can promise you creative strategy is not that role.
It is not.
As someone who has had to break it down and systemize it to help us build a better product, it is actually so much harder than you think. Yeah.
Guys, I hear you loud and clear. But let's say I'm a creative team member. You're speaking at this level. What I really need to know is like, okay, tomorrow, step one, what the heck am I doing? So Alicia, based on experience, like where can people start? this process?
If you're starting from a different perspective, whether you're a UGC creator, a designer, a social media manager, a copywriter, of course, just start looking in the other direction. So we always talked about initially data and creative, and whether you're on either side of the spectrum, you just have to start moving towards that other end of the spectrum. But in terms of like practical advice too, I honestly think just organic social media at this point is the best thing to look at. So if you're not in tune with what's happening on organic social media, practically, that's a great place to start.
Huge. I love it. Easy place to start. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit because we've been flirting with the idea of like there's so much that motion is cooking up across the board. So I really want to bring our community up to speed on some of the plans that we have. Reza, I'm going to throw this one to you first. There's been a lot that's happened this year across the board, right? So I'm wondering if you could share a bit of the story on like what's happened and where we're going, especially on the product side of things.
Yeah, it's so cool because like Motion's journey has been in many ways tied to the hip with the story of the creative strategist. Early on when we were ideating and we came across this problem between media buyers and creative people, it was like, who are we building for? And we had the choice in that moment. It was like media buyers have all these other problems. Creative teams have all these other problems too, but they both kind of had this shared problem around needing to collaborate better. It felt like we had this perspective early on too, that there was going to be a role that needs to fulfill this. It's not just going to magically going to like bridge. And so we took a pretty big bet that the creative strategist role was going to get more and more important. I remember at the time, it was kind of insane. We were fundraising for our seed round, and we talked about this idea of a creative strategist. And investor was like, what the hell is this? What do you mean that you're building a product for his non-existent role? Like, what's going on here? When we raised our Series B last year, it was like a commitment to that same story that oftentimes a company will go and like once they start to scale to a certain point, in order to reach some bigger milestone, they kind of need to become the everything company. That moment was an interesting question for us. Like, okay, is this the point where because we want to scale to become bigger, Motion starts to broaden a bit and say, okay, we're kind of for the creative strategist, but we're also solving problems for these other roles. And we thought pretty hard about that. And we're like, no, this thing is going to still keep growing. Like the creative strategist, in our view, is still very much in its infancy, especially with what was going on with AI. That at the end of last year, when we raised our Series B, it was like, okay, now this whole thing needs to be reinvented to be AI first, both for us as a tech company, like any tech company that's been paying any attention for the last 1 year has basically needed to go all the way down to the roots of their system and reinvent themselves, which has been quite the journey. And for us, that was like, we need to become AI native. The creative strategist needs to become AI native because we have this long stretch ahead of us, both Motion as a company and creative strategist as a role that we need to prepare for. So the last, I want to say like since January especially, Motion has been in like, okay, rip everything out, reimagine everything, like literally all the way down to the core of our system to be AI native. We shipped out a lot of stuff. So like our expert agents was the big kind of AI release that we were experimenting with all year. I think everybody who played with them gave us a lot of really great feedback. And us and all of our users who used it are like, we see the vision for this, but like obviously the agents that we released early on were very simple. You click the button and they would do one task for you and it didn't even have a follow-up. Like it was very, very primitive. But underneath all of that, it was the perfect vehicle for us to start testing AI systems in our product. And a lot of what people didn't see and a lot of work that Alicia and others on our team have been working super hard on is how do we reinvent the core of how Motion's infrastructure works to basically support the next 10 years of AI investment that we want to do into this role. And so a lot of exciting product drops coming out in Q4 for Motion. And a lot of that has been because of all the investments we made on the infrastructure side. So excited to dive into a lot of those. But this year has been reinvent mode for Motion. And I'm excited to wrap up this year. A lot of people are going to see the fruits of that effort. And hopefully it becomes like the beginning of the next chapter for Motion and creative strategists together.
Can we give people a sneak peek into what that's looking like? Is there anything we can foundationally layer on what they can look forward to?
Totally, yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about it, and then Alicia, maybe you dive into more details on how it works. But when we started thinking about, okay, if we want to reinvent this whole thing to be AI native, what's the best way to do that? And so we thought about creative strategy pre-AI. And what's the foundational piece of that? And one of the things that I always remember is that for the first few calls of Motion, all the way through the like 4 years in, it comes up so often on calls, is that people get really excited about the platform. And then they often say something like, well, it looks like for me to get the max out of motion, it seems like I really need to have this like robust naming convention. That seems really important. And, a lot of great teams invest heavily into their naming conventions, and that basically becomes the foundation of their testing strategy. For AI to build an entire creative strategy system from an AI native lens, we started at the question of what does naming conventions look like in an AI first way. Basically, that's like the big first investment that Motion has made in our pursuit to becoming an AI native platform is how do we introduce the concept of AI tags? AI can go and tag anything that you want it to, but how do we introduce a language, a taxonomy that the AI and the humans on the team can both align on that becomes the foundation for all of it? And so that was the point that we decided to spend a lot of time on. Alicia led the effort there, and very, very excited about how it's turned out. Everybody who signs up to Motion will now see that their ads are tagged in a very elaborate way with AI. And there's a lot more for us to talk about around like how we're going to use that to extend the capabilities of the rest of the products that we're building. If you don't have good taxonomy around what are things called, what are we testing, then basically nothing else really works. And so I'm very excited about that as a really foundational piece that we've invested in, and excited for Alicia to tell you more about how it works.
Yeah, it's been so fun seeing it from my angle, because I think like when you think of AI tagging, it sounds basic. But what's been so cool is we've literally built a team of creative strategists to tackle this who have such strong opinions. So Alicia, I would love if you can take it away and show the people some of what this looks like.
Yeah, for sure. The most important part of this for me is that naming conventions, what they were trying to achieve was unlocking creative insights. So Motion did a great job bridging that gap between creative and data. But in order to get to a true creative insight, you still had to watch your ads and understand what was going on in the ad in order to identify what was working, what wasn't, so that you could decide what to do next. So the thing that AI tags does for everyone is unlocks the same power and the same abilities that naming conventions do without having to manage naming conventions. Because I think every creative strategist, every media buyer can agree that managing a naming convention system is actually heinous. Like it's very, very difficult and confusing. And especially if you work on a big team with a lot of different stakeholders, it can break in a million different places. So we have just done that for you, which is incredible. Okay, so when you hop into a top ads report in Motion, you'll notice something new, which is that we've tagged all of your ads in these 8 categories. And these are the 8 categories that you should care about. So let's dive into visual format, which is the one that you probably hear spoken about most often. Immediately, you can start to identify patterns in your creative to determine what is leading to performance within your creative. But if I were to ask the question, what is my top visual format? What these AI tags unlock for you is comparative reports. And this is a type of report that a lot of teams without naming conventions really couldn't get the most out of until now. Now with AI tags, with one click, grouping by visual format, I can immediately identify that green screen is one of my top ad formats, but I can also see here that skit is my top ad format. In addition to that, I can also see where I can identify some opportunities, some visual formats that we should lean into a little bit harder, and visual formats that might not be on this list that you should try next. So I know what you're all thinking. Are these tags accurate? And how do I know for sure that these are the correct tags on all of my creative? We have spoken to hundreds of teams, and what we actually notice is that the teams that have the most criticism about these tags are the people who are already thinking in this systematic approach and probably already have a really strong naming convention established within their teams. But that doesn't mean that these tags are incorrect. They're just different. And what I mean by that is that this LLM that is tagging all of your creative is a neutral third party that's trained on creative strategy best practices. So while you might tag something a certain value and the LLM tags it differently, it's not necessarily incorrect. It just identifies something that you might not have noticed about your creative. So they can work in tandem with your naming conventions to bring new creative insights to your team that you might not have noticed before and that you might get a really great value out of.
One of the things we've talked about that is interesting as we try to build in an AI first way is that we're kind of no longer building just for humans. We need to create a system that the teams that use Motion align on, but we also need to create a system that the AI agents that are going to do work for our customers also are able to align on and understand. Because anybody who's worked with AI will know that the better context you feed it, the more structured you are in your inputs, the more effective it could be, the less it hallucinates, the less confused it gets on doing the work for you. The AI tags initiatives was a really good example of, as we thought about building the system, it was built for AI agents as much as it is built for humans. And that's a pattern that you're going to see more and more in tech companies who are doing a good job, is that, you know, you want to be able to leverage AI and AI systems to help you do good work. But if the things that you have in your mind, if the way that you view the world is not understood by the AI systems that are meant to help you, it's one reason why people sometimes get frustrated with ChatGPT. They're like, you know, it's great. They go back and forth and they ideate, but if it doesn't really understand the history of my ads, or if it doesn't understand this or that about my business, so you feel like you constantly have to explain it things over and over again. And this is a really interesting system that is very easy for the LLMs to understand what you mean when you say visual format, very easy for them to scan and go and like see the historical patterns of those things, so that when you're communicating with AI, you're both exactly on the same page and can move a lot more quickly.
It's wild to think. It's wild to think. And I think I'm so excited for that feature, but I can't help but think that I am a brand. And Alicia, something that I'm curious about is I might sit back and say, that tag's wrong, that tag's wrong. What the heck is that? Like, I don't believe any of this. So to those folks who might have some doubt, what can you offer to them?
Ooh, I mean, beyond saying it's not really wrong, I think I do see people who critique the tags 100%. And usually those are the people who have those naming conventions in place and are already thinking in this way. And they just refer to things a little bit differently. So when we talk about what's a concept, what's a framework, what's a format, lots of people use those terms interchangeably, for example. The thing about our system is that we've really tried to identify the key Creative Strategy 101 system. Like, if this was the system that worked for everyone, what would that system look like? So that's what we're operating on. And what I would say is it's not wrong. It might just be slightly different, and it might actually unlock new insights that you hadn't thought of. That's the thing that's most exciting for me, is when you do rely on a naming convention and your own tags, it relies on you as a person identifying what's happening in the ad. And we all know that we're a bit biased about our ads as marketers, but the LLM is truly a neutral third party that's tagging based on these really important values that mean something. And so it's able to actually identify things that sometimes even I go, oh, that might be wrong. And then I watch the ad and I'm like, oh no, it's actually pointing out something that I didn't notice. So I think as much as we want to eliminate naming conventions by building this system for people, I think it can also work in tandem with your naming conventions to actually fill in gaps that you might not have noticed before.
Huge. But here's the thing. Everybody, listen. Come here. Alicia is underselling this too. She herself is probably a top 1% creative strategist from all the conversations we've had with so many folks in our industry. And the amount of love and care she's put into the prompts that then read your creative, I'd say is unmatched. So that's something that I think you're underselling a bit. And then to add on top of that, agreed, naming conventions are still important. This is just adding to them. But one of the really cool things is it's not like we've gone into our little dungeon and said, we're going to make this and we're going to tell you how it goes. How many people have we talked to about this stuff?
Hundreds.
And what have we heard from them?
They love it. Yeah. It started, there was a lot of criticism initially, but that just meant that we had more work to do. We talked to more people, we improved it over time, and we really did hone in on this like overarching system that we feel represents the industry best practices, essentially. Something that we think could work for everyone, whether it works by replacing your entire process or just by adding to it. We feel really strongly that this is a system worth paying attention to and that will bring really great, incredible value inside of the product. One thing that I'm really excited about is, especially for those teams with newer creative strategists who are a little bit newer to visual formats and messaging angles, there's now this educational component inside of the product. Every single value here that's tagged also has a definition. So in addition to learning what's working about your ads, you can also better understand about why that's working and what that actually means, what these visual formats mean, what these messaging angles mean, and why you should pay attention to them. And then, of course, when you generate an AI report, the LLM also gets that same information, so you're on the same page. So it all works together.
I love it. And speed is everything. Everybody knows that. It's not like we've moved slow here, but this is something that got tender love and care. It needed to be right, and the quality is definitely there. I love it, Alicia. Reza, the next thing I want to throw to you here is like, that was the perfect zoom in to one of the areas that we have planned. I guess what I'm curious about, is there any other sneak peeks you can give us into some of the areas that we're thinking about?
Yeah, well, best way to think about our roadmap is basically directly tied to the job of the creative strategist. So like anything that you can think about that's central to what a creative strategist needs to do a great job is very much on our roadmap and areas that we care about. And I think you could probably think about the role of the creative strategist in a few different buckets that they spend a lot of time on. The first is obviously analytics, because if that's not there, if the work that we're doing is not grounded in performance data, then we're just guessing, and like it's not going to lead to that kind of revenue driven obsession that we talked about that's really important. So analytics is obviously really important, which is why, to build our system, we went right back to our own starting point. Like Motion started off as analytics as our core focus area. And so I think that still remains true for the AI realm, is like, how do you get the fundamentals of analytics really, really right? And it's one of those things that, Evan, you mentioned that like it's easy to think about an AI tagging feature could probably be built in 5 minutes. Like to say, we've built an AI tagging feature. I could literally go to Claude and do it in 5 minutes. And this is something that we've been working on for, I want to say like 3 or 4 months now. And it's one of those things that like, if you want to trust your entire system on it, what you see on these like colorful tags that are really pleasant to look at inside of Motion is one thing, but it's like the depth of the system underneath it is really, really important. One of the ways to think about Motion is that we are investing there just as much as we're investing in like the actual products that you're going to use, which we're also investing heavily there as well. But like it's a very big part of how we think about our roadmap and building the system. So that's analytics. The other part that's really important is around creative research. Last year's Creative Strategy Summit, we announced Motion's creative research product. When we announced it, it was basically like we knew that this was an important area for our customers, and we knew that we needed to solve a pain point there. But we had launched it on a free plan, and it was not a like core product pillar to the business. And we're like, we know that our customers want it, and we know there's like paid solutions out there. And Motion was like, okay, if we can build a free version that's kind of good enough for people who just want the basics of creative research, that was kind of the intention of the product that we shipped there last year. And over the last several months, we've started to view inspo and creative research as a very, very core product pillar to the business. And so what started out last year as kind of a free entry level creative research product for us has basically become like a first class citizen in our product roadmap. And over the next couple of quarters, you can see that product line become world class. And so I'm very excited about that. We also launched AI agents we talked a little bit about, and that was like probably the funnest that I've had since the beginning of Motion. It's just been fascinating to work with these AI systems, and everyone has kind of experienced this. You're working on something, and then a month later, a new model drops, and like something that was hard just becomes easy. We have felt that in a really big way over the last couple of months, so that things that felt out of reach, like we talked about certain capabilities earlier this year that felt like a dream, like years away, that now I'm seeing the prototypes and it's like, oh my God, this thing is real. The agent system of Motion is going to be a very, very big part of our future bet. And the best way to think about it is that if you go and build an agent system for a creative strategy, but it's not rooted in world-class analytics and not rooted in world-class research, it's not really going to be that effective. And so like we can kind of think about the environment that the agent lives in is almost more important than the capability of the agent, which is why our investment in like analytics and research as core parts of the platform is really important. But then the agents who sit on top of that are basically able to now help do a lot of the execution work that creative strategists would do after that. And so maybe for that part, I'll leave it at that on the agent side, because once you have a really strong foundation on the analytics side, really strong foundation on the research side, and really, really capable agents, truly the sky is the limit on where and how they can help beyond that. And for us, there's no end to that. And so we're very excited into investing into the core parts of the platform and also building out our agent system that will help you basically use all of that to do a lot of really, really amazing work and help our customers just rise up to the highest level of strategy to do the most damage and to like have all of Motion system support them so that they can make the really big high impact decisions and do their work a lot faster.
I think one of the last areas that I'm curious to dive into here, the creative strategist role is going to become 100 times more important. That's a bold claim. So what I'm curious about is, Where are we on this path? How is it going to look? And any other opinions?
Man, where are we on this path? I think especially with the introduction of AI, we truly are just beginning. This role has so much power and so much potential. And I think if you can master the role, the sky's the limit. Yeah, and I agree. There's just so much potential for this role to really move the needle and maybe have the most impact on creative teams than ever before. And so, yeah, I agree. It's just the beginning.
The way I would look at it is, you can think about the role, or you can think about the pain point that exists inside of organizations that are trying to do work. So like if you look at any organization, what they usually look for is like, what are the problems that we want to solve? And what are the things that have the highest impact? And we should zoom into those areas, and those create the biggest unlock. So like an example might be most brands, and this is actually interesting because I think it's true for a brand who's spending $5,000 a month in media spend, and it's true for a brand who's spending $2 million a month on media spend or more. And one thing that's been really cool about our journey at Motion is that we've worked with customers on that entire range. We have brands who spend like many millions per month in media spend, and brands who are just starting out. And the thing that it ties both of those situations together is that often they'll reach some kind of media spend plateau where they just can't break into the next level of spend. So they might be spending $10,000 a month, and every time they try to spend a little bit more, they see their ROAS start to go down. Or you might be spending $1 million a month. It's a different problem set, but it's roughly the same thing. We want to now go to 1.5 million a month, and we see our ROAS decline. And so in some sense, like that's the problem set to think about. That's what companies are looking to solve. And then the question is, what's the best way to solve that? And that becomes the part of the problem solving that becomes the most important piece of the equation. That's the role that is the unlock to that problem. Oftentimes, it's not like, can we do better targeting? Or can we do a better job producing ads that look like this or look like that? The question is like, what do we do more of? What do we do less of? And it's almost entirely rooted in creative. Even if it's about unlocking a new channel, it's still about creative. What creative is going to work in this new channel? Unlocking a different audience demographic. What's going to work in that audience demographic? And like one of the views that we have about where the creative strategist role evolves, and we'll see what it ends up becoming called in the future. Every year, it seems like the name continues to stick. So maybe that's the name forever. But the question becomes like, how do you learn about signals on the go-to-market side and impact the feedback loop on how you run your business? So you might, for example, learn something in your market that, hey, if we went into this new product line and sold into this new demographic, it can unlock a lot of revenue for our business. Who's the person who should be thinking about that? Oftentimes that strategy of who are we selling to? What are we selling to them? What do they want? What's their pain point? That tends to be the biggest signal to drive business decisions anyways, which is one reason why I think if you're a small team and you're a founder, like chief creative strategy officer should be the founder, because you're looking for signal to say, we have stuff and we want to sell it to a market. And that's not a static thing. We could create more stuff and we could sell it to more people. And we need to figure out, how do we do that the best? And so that entire equation, that's like the highest impact equation for companies. And it all sits in creative strategy.
I love that you both brought two separate perspectives and it married together nicely. Because Alicia, something that I hear is like the individuals who are involved in this process, what it starts to look like down the path of 100x is that it's not just paid ads or paid media. Mm-hmm. You're starting to touch so many different parts of the business. Yeah. And then Reza, you spoke about like higher level abstraction, the business level. What do they care about and how important this problem is? I love it. And it meets in the middle. Reza, where I want you to take us home though, is like our investment into this. So it's like talking about what's happening in the natural shift in the world right now, and then where this role is going in the 100x capacity. For us, like, where are we at? How are we thinking about contributing to this?
Our community has seen Motion go from like very small startup. We've raised a couple of rounds of capital. And one of the things that tends to happen, and I think our customers felt this, maybe felt concerned about this when we raised our Series B, is that like, do you get to a point where you start to get distracted? We talked about this a little earlier too, but we're very committed to this idea that we want to build a very large business. Side tangent, but if you start a company and you raise capital, the reason you do that is because you're committed to building a very large company. You should not do that if you want to build a great business that's kind of limited in size. It's a very bad idea to raise capital because the incentives are very misaligned. We were very clear about what we thought is the opportunity for the size of business that we think Motion can get to. And we feel extremely committed that serving the creative strategist and building the command center for the creative strategist will be the path that takes Motion to be becoming a very large business, because this role is very much in its infancy. And so our journey and the creative strategist journey are like very much on the same path. And we're committed to it because we think that it could be a lot more important in the future. And in order for that role to reach its potential, it needs better tooling. There's a whole industry that gets built around the tooling for that role, the content, the community, the education around that role. And our commitment to the creative strategist is on all of those dimensions. We know that if we create better education, we'll create more sophisticated motion users. That's better for our business and better for the industry. And so this is like, we were talking before we started too, that the Creative Strategy Summit is usually like the pulse check for motion and the industry on like this role of creative strategist. And so one more year of renewal that motion continues to be invested and all in on the creative strategist role for 2026.
Oh, everybody, you better be ready to put those creative strategist hats on. It's going to be more important now than ever before, and we are just getting started. Thank you both. This has been absolutely incredible. I sincerely appreciate the time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.